Okay, welcome to the study hall for June 5th. So we are going to have another installment of personalizing passages. And as I remarked before starting the recording, we actually have enough questions for this to actually last another few study halls. We'll probably do some different topics next couple study halls just to inject some variety here, but it just goes to show you how potent this approach of personalization really is. I mean, there's enough of these problems. Just out of the 150, 200 GMAT prep problems that are in the free software, there's enough to fuel 6, 7, 8 study halls worth of problems. That's how often you can personalize the passages. And what we mean by that is adopting the perspective of whoever's actions determine the outcome of the passage most directly. So, and we'll see this, if you've seen the previous couple editions of the study hall, you'll already know the kinds of things I'm talking about. If not, you'll see it as we develop these problems. When we say give me a smiley face, you'll see underneath your name is not, fortunately for you, your name is not around your wall. But wherever your name is, you'll see these icons, and emoticons are here, and you'll have a smiley face and other faces in here. When I say give me a smiley face, just to make sure you're on the same page as me, that's this smiley face, meaning not a smiley in the chat box. Also, along the same lines, multiple choice questions, make sure you know where those are found. The multiple choice options you will find underneath your name as well. Please use the multiple choice options that are available underneath your name. This is important because there are a lot of people in attendance, and we really don't want people's answers to influence one another. So please answer in this polling section, and then your answers are kept private as well. And I can't force you to do this, but even if you guess, the way this actual exam works is you have to answer all the things. That's how the actual process works. They don't let you not answer stuff, so you want to build that habit here as well of answering absolutely everything all the time. Okay, copyright notice. All of the problems are from the free GMAT prep software. Copyright owned by GMAC. With that said, let's go ahead and jump into one of these. How about that one? Give you a timer. Let's try it again. Here's a timer. Go for it. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Just go ahead and pick an answer, pick a thing that is a thing. A, B, C, D, E on this problem. Remember that this is, again, I can't, sit here forever and wait for everyone, but this is a test that does not allow you to not answer the question. Also, as far as guessing, I mean, I don't normally show the answer distributions just because, honestly, the group answers shouldn't matter much to individuals, but this problem is almost completely random responses. I mean, we have two choices that are less popular than others, but so you don't need to feel bad about guessing things here is the point. So if you don't have a guess, then make one, please. And remember, today's theme is personalizing the passages. I mean, basically, whenever you have any sort of passage involving interactions among people or businesses or basically any sort of human entities, there's going to be someone whose perspective or whose actions is ultimately central. Because, to have a single focus or a single issue, as these passages do, you ultimately have to center on one perspective. I mean, you can't really have a split concern. So, who can tell me, I mean, whose point of view or whose situation or whose perspective or whose experience in this problem is ultimately the determiner of things? You can tell me in the chat box. Yeah, it's Meathan, not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but the elderly citizens, what do the elderly citizens experience here? Absolutely. So let's take a look at this. So we want to view this. And again, on these problems, what you might want to do is, I mean, this is not dogma. You don't have to approach the passages this way. But one, you may want to try, at least, the following approach, where you just quickly browse the passage to make the decision of whose perspective do I want to read from. And then go back once you've made that decision and read more slowly and carefully from that perspective. So because if you do this, I mean, ultimately the argument here centers around whether the elderly citizens of this country are any better off. And so, of course, if you make yourself one of them, then this becomes a very personal question of, are you financially better off? So let's do that. So let's read the passage as an elderly citizen of the country. So then the issue here, better off is reasonably it's going to be defined. And I mean, what's the only reasonable way that you could define better off here? Someone give me what's a standard by which we can judge that? I mean, better off sounds like it's vague, but things that are vague we have to define in a way that a 10-year-old will understand. Exactly. I mean, if a 10-year-old says, what does that mean, better off? You're like, do you actually have more money in your pocket? Yeah. Do I have more money now? Now that the government has increased pensions. Because this kind of throws things into stark relief, right? I mean, even if you just phrase this question without going to read the passage yet, you can kind of tell the way this is. I mean, what's the only way that the answer could be no? Because, I mean, the government is paying you more. That's a thing. It's going on here. So what is the only way that you could not be making more money, ultimately speaking? Well, consumption, but consumption is not really a matter of am I better off. I mean, consumption is something I might do more of if I am better off, but consumption is not going to answer the question of whether my situation. Same thing about what you're buying. I mean, if what you're buying is going up, that would be more of a result of that, but it's not going to answer the question of it. Yeah, it's more like what Peter is going after here. It's a matter of, because remember, it's still dollars and cents. I mean, better off is only going to be a function of money in my pocket. It doesn't matter what the source of that money is. It's just if there's more money in my account, then I'm better off here. It's the only real way to define that. So the only way that this cannot happen is if some other thing is going to offset the pension. You know, like if the government pays me more money, but then suddenly I get less money from somewhere else. Yeah, this is the issue. I mean, the government is definitely paying me more. And if you adopt the perspective of these elderly citizens, it should be clear. I mean, you got a 20% pay raise from the government. So the only way I could not be better off, quote unquote better off, is if I'm getting less money from somewhere else. Because I mean, inflation is not going to immediately affect things. I mean, even if there were some sort of rapid inflation going on, inflation is not going to be so nuts that it will cancel out a 20% increase immediately. I mean, that would still take time. So, and inflation is a non-thing. Remember, we haven't read the passage yet. So if the thought of inflation came to mind, still that would take, you know, I mean, unless it was, you know, some crazy pre-war hyperinflation. I mean, it would take a while for that to happen. So let's take a look. All right. So yeah, they're paying me more money. They're paying me more money. And things still cost the same. So now let's go ahead and read the passage from this perspective. The passage from my perspective as an elderly citizen is, I'm getting 20% more from the government. And things cost the same as they always have. Things cost the same as they always have. And yet, I have no more money in my pocket. So you can anticipate that it has to be something. There's got to be a decrease from some other quarter. I mean, from some other source of income has to be going down. Otherwise, this would be impossible. So if you take a look at that, it's not A. I mean, if A were true, then I would be exactly 20% better off than I was before. So in fact, A would not only does A not fill in the blank, but it actually, A would prove the statement before the blank false. It would actually make this Brown statement incorrect. Because if A were true, then I would be exactly 20% better off than I was before. B, 3 weeks to cash a pension check. That means, you know, I'm going to be 3 weeks behind, but a 3-week delay is not really going to affect my overall financial health here. C is not the current situation, so honestly, I don't care. I mean, they say in the passage that inflation right now is not a thing. So, C, if there were inflation, these goods would inflate relatively quickly. But guess what, guys? There's not inflation. So this is not a thing. It's irrelevant. And then it doesn't contradict the passage. I'm responding to the chat box there because it doesn't say that there is inflation. Like basically, you can read this as a hypothetical. In times of inflation means if there were inflation. If we were in a time of high inflation, then this thing. But as Angelica points out, our passage happens to say that we are not in a time of inflation. Row meat, I'm not exactly sure what phase lag is. It's a bit smart for me. The pension was increased when, so D just says, I remember this choice D, which a lot of you guys like for some reason. If you read it from my perspective, it's much easier to see why D doesn't matter. Like, D is the motivation behind paying me more money. I mean, D says that if you look at my fellow older people, most of us were kind of in a worse situation than normal. And so that's why the government decided to step up our income. But the point is that they still stepped up our income, right? I mean, this is choice D. This is why. This may be why the government stepped up the pension. But remember what the focus of the passage is. The focus of the passage is, do I have more money in my pocket or not? So all I care about is that they stepped it up. I mean, even if, as a collective, even if we're kind of in a bad situation, we are still 20% better off than we were. I mean, this doesn't change the fact that we're 20% better off. But now let's read E from the perspective of one of these older citizens. I mean, E, what does E say? I mean, how much are my kids giving me? My kids are basically paying the what? The government pays a certain amount. Yeah, they're paying the difference. That's what this means. Only buy enough to reach up to this whatever standard of living. So they're just paying the difference. Like if N dollars is a reasonable standard of living and the government is paying me G dollars, then they just pay N minus G dollars. They just pay the rest of it. So they're going to step it down by the same amount. They're like, oh, hey, the government's paying you more. I can pay you less now. So this is going to be the one we want. And again, when you personalize this, it is much clearer that that is the case. What if the pension? Well, the other choices don't explain it at all, and choice E does explain it if the pension is lower than that, so we have an unambiguous winner. I mean, I suppose that's probably a possibility, but that means, all that means is that E could explain it. I mean, it means that E is not rigorously 100%, but all the other choices have a 0% ability to explain it. So, yeah, well, they typically supplement, so should we assume, yeah, because they typically supplement expressed in the present tense, meaning it's still a thing. Like if they stopped when the pension was given out, then this would have to be written as they typically supplemented the income of elderly parents until this action was taken by the government. I mean, that would be no longer a thing. So I thought it was a constant, but this proves that it's not a constant, only by enough to achieve this. So by enough refers to a difference. I mean, you could read it that way if you read up to the comma. But then the words after the comma specifically tell you that it's not a constant amount, that it's going to be enough to step you up to a threshold. So does it mean that the increase in pension is related to more people? No, it doesn't, because if you read the passage, it's a 20% increase in every individual person's pension. 20% increase paid to the people. So if you are over 60, and I'm over 65, I used to get X dollars from the government, now I get 1.2 X dollars from the government. It's not an overall distribution thing. When you measure pensions, you don't measure pensions as an aggregate. You measure it as like how much is paid to the retirees. Okay, cool. And again, just amazing how much insight you have just by adopting this perspective. Like if you are the elderly person and you read E, it'll come alive and it'll be like, okay, my son or daughter comes in and gives me the rest of what I need to. I mean, just imagine it. Imagine taking place. How much do you need, Dad? Like how much extra? I mean, the only way you're gonna be able to imagine this is like how much more on top of what you got you need. It'll tell you can't make this come alive without realizing it's a difference. It's good stuff. All right, we got one person typing. Need an option 6. Don't really understand that comment. Maybe you could explain it. Let's move on to another one. How about that one? Yeah, you guys can see the problem, right? Yes or no, chat box. Sorry for the interruption. Okay. Sometimes there are issues with tablets. Let me try to just here. I'll reset your timer in a second there. Maybe that will do it. If that doesn't do it, then I don't know what to do. Okay. Here's a little bit more time. If you need a little bit more time, then take it. But let's start wrapping this up. Ladies and gentlemen. Okay, there's still a few of you who don't have answers selected, but let's get rolling here. Whose actions or perspective lies at the center of this thing? Someone tell me in the chat box. Whose eyes should we be looking through? It's going to be from the perspective of parents, right? So, absolutely. Because when you talk about whether children are going to use something, I mean, that's got to go through the bottleneck of the parents. Because, you know, a kid is not going to go out and get a flu vaccine all by him or herself. Absolutely. So, when you first read this, you browse it and you notice, okay, we're talking about whether kids will basically start using a vaccine, which is ultimately a parent thing. So read from the parent's standpoint. You're the parent. Okay, so now let's read this thing again from your standpoint. So right now, the only flu vaccines out there, including those for your kid, are injections, needles. But now there's a nasal spray, or at least that's the wrong way to say it. Not right now. Up to now, the only flu vaccines have been injections. But now there's a nasal spray that doesn't have to be injected. And then what do we know about the actual, like, do we know that this is going to work? Is there any doubt as to whether the nasal spray will actually work? What do you guys think? There's no doubt, right? Because the way that you should, again, as a parent, you don't need to think about like, specifics of clinical trials or anything like that. You just got to read these words as it's gonna work. I mean, there's no doubt that it will work. There's a nasal spray that will definitely work. Sure. So it's going to be a thing that works. If you have a question, please type it in the chat box and not in raised hand. Thanks. Okay. Also, Koji, I noticed you opened up a private chat window. Please just type chats in the main chat room. That would, if you open up the private window, I'm not going to see it, and neither will anybody else. So, thanks. Okay, so there's a nasal spray that will definitely work. And so therefore, I will use it. Or in this case, you. So you are more likely to give it to your kid. Because, I mean, there's already a vaccine out there. That's how you have to interpret this, right? Because there's already a vaccine out there. It's not an issue of, whoa, this is new and I've never had a vaccine before. So the only way that what this means for you as a parent, this means that you will give your kid the new vaccine, but you wouldn't have given your kid the old one. Because there has to be parents who fit that profile. I mean, if you would have given your kid the injection as well, like if you're a parent who would just, oh, well, we would have given my kid the shot, but oh, convenient, we don't have to give them a shot anymore, then it doesn't matter. I mean, that's not going to increase compliance. It's not going to do anything. The only way that this is going to happen from your standpoint as a parent is if you are a parent who formerly would not have given your kid a flu shot. But now you are down with that. So this is what we want. I mean, this is the thing that we need to support. So, and if you read it from the perspective of a parent, look how specific that got. Almost effortlessly. I mean, it's just what it means. Because I mean, basically that's the strength of personalizing these passages. Like whenever you have these abstract statistical statements, or generalizations, you have to translate those into things that make sense or that mean something for you as an individual who is involved. So you can't leave this as reduce the spread of influenza across the population. That's not a thing. But for you as an individual, this means you will give your kid the flu shot. You're going to do your part of that. What is your contribution? That's what you have to answer when you personalize these things. So you need to support this idea. So there's one answer choice that is an absolute home run here, which would be this one. Great. This means that I am much more likely to, yes, give my kid the vaccine if it is not injected. Perfect. Let's take a look at the other choices, then we'll talk about that thing in the box. And then, well, okay, I'll address these things in the box in a sec. This, again, we're talking about not giving your kid the shot, so we don't really care what happens with both of them. Because remember, the only way that this is going to happen is if I'm one of the parents who wouldn't have given my kid the shot in the first place. So this is a non-issue. The new vaccine uses the same mechanism to ward off influenza as injectable vaccines do. Mechanism is irrelevant because that's not a difference. I mean, we need something that is different, not something that is the same. So, Moria, I'm not exactly sure what that comment means, although not the most polite thing that someone has typed lately. We need a difference between these two things. I mean, B is a commonality. If you point out anything that these have in common, it's not going to explain this, because it would just, things like B will just convince me that I'll treat these two things the same way as a parent. It puts them on an equal footing. So, not good. We need to put them on not an equal footing. C is a cost issue. But that's the injectable. If this said that the nasal spray was cheap, this would be a great answer choice. And if it was for kids. I mean, there's two things that make this irrelevant, which are it's the wrong one, and it's also not for kids. And then D actually makes this whole thing almost irrelevant. Like, if D is a thing that fewer people get it from kids than we thought, then it just makes this entire plan almost irrelevant. Because then the effect of doing this on the spread across the population will just be much less of an effect. Okay, any questions about the actual answer choices? If not, I'll go ahead and address a couple of these things that were written in the chat box. So it's going to disappear so that I can post those. So let's address a couple of these things. All right, so should we pre-think answers? So there's not really a simple answer to a question like that, but here are a couple of thoughts in response to that. I mean, the first and probably the most important thing I can say is, like, as you read the passage, certain thoughts should occur to you. Certain thoughts or connections will or should come to mind. Just because they will. I mean, that's especially if you personalize sufficiently. Especially if you are viewing the situation with a personal stake in it. If you have a personal investment in the situation, then absolutely, right? For example, if you are a parent who's considering inoculating your child against the flu, then when you read this, you will automatically make the connection of, okay, well, this means I'm going to be more willing, because that's the only way this could happen. So that, if that's what you mean by pre-thinking, then you're going to make those connections, which is the whole point of personalizing the passage. Now, on the other hand, I think I made this analogy a couple of sessions ago, but it's worth making again. If this question is, should I actually try to predict a specific answer, then that's going to depend. I mean, the best answer I've got to that is it's going to depend on whether you'll still be open to other answers. I mean, the analogy that I made a couple of sessions back was, like, let's say that you and your significant other go on a trip together and you drive to the airport and park. And then when you come back, you're looking for your car, but it's actually the other person's car that's there. The question is, will you see that car, or will you be so wrapped up in looking for your own car that you just will walk right past it? It depends on the individual. I mean, some people are one of those, some people are the other. If you're the type who would be so wrapped up in looking for your car that you would actually miss your significant other's car, then predicting is probably a bad idea. Because by analogy, you might be so wrapped up in your answer that another correct answer might escape you. You know, like if you were looking for something like that, but they gave you the nasal spray is much cheaper than the injection for kids, which would be another correct answer to this. If you would be so wrapped up in looking for this that you wouldn't see that other correct answer, then that would be dangerous to make those predictions. On the other hand, you could have a prediction yet still be open to other possibilities, then there's no downside, and so then you may as well try. And then, as far as this other comment goes, there are a couple of responses to it. I mean, the first response is kind of the non-response of, okay, but what else are you gonna do? But the second response is I would say this is not really true, because I mean, when you shouldn't be true anyway, because when you read from a personal perspective, what should happen is that you'll have an instant filter. I mean, you should instantly be able to filter out what matters and actually filter out what doesn't matter. Because it's your perspective. I mean, you have personal stake. Like when you're reading this passage and you see this whole thing about reducing general spread across the population, if you're a parent, you don't care about the entire population so much. You just care about, I'm going to give my kid a shot, or I'm going to give my kid a vaccine that I wouldn't have given before. I mean, that's instant. The connections are faster than they would be if you did not have a personal stake in the matter. It's the same way, if you're personally having an argument, if there's a strength and weaken question, if you're personally arguing about something as your argument, you will instantly know whether something is on your side or against your side. It doesn't take time and cogitation to figure that out. So this should actually speed up the process. And then last but not least, don't forget that average times don't apply to all problems. I mean, if 2 minutes is an average, averages are averages. So, and if you're viewing a problem with lots of words in it, then problems that are longer than average can take more. I mean, the worst thing that you can do is assume that every problem has to be done in the exact same amount of time, because, I mean, problems with more words will generally take you longer. So, well, sure, although society doesn't really have, society is not a being with a single point of view. I mean, society is constructed of many conflicting and interacting points of view. So it's not, you can't, society doesn't have instincts and personal stakes and motivations. Society doesn't go out and buy things for reasons and so on. I mean, society is not a unified viewpoint. Okay, let's do another. I mean, the question about how would you know to take the perspective right away, it's not necessarily right away. Sorry, I mean, as I mentioned in the other problem, you can browse real quick. Run through it, we're talking about inoculating a child. But you'll realize quickly enough that the issue is, inoculate child or not inoculate child. And then common sense says that's a parent's decision. I mean, it's not necessarily instantaneous. You'll have to browse the words that are there. But if you think about who's doing this, like if you were the public health person and you had to decide who to give the message to, you would give it to the parents. You definitely would. And it's that same sort of reasoning that would let you take their perspective here. Hope that helps. Let's try this one. Alrighty. Give it a shot. Okay. Moria, I think that you are having internet delays. I can see icons that show that you're not receiving the streaming at the thing is delayed for you for some reason. The internet connection, most likely. Okay. Let's talk about this. Whose perspective is a thing here? I mean, it doesn't have to be a person. Here there's no people involved, but you can just as well personalize as an animal. Which dolphins? I mean, which dolphins are the focus of this whole analysis? Not the adults. The adults are chilling. I mean, the adults are healthy and long-lived and they're normal, but it's the younger dolphins, the dolphin children, that are the ones who are affected. So let's be those dolphins. Because, you know, the parent dolphins are chilling. I mean, their lives are perfectly normal dolphin lives. So you be the abnormal baby dolphin. Because then you like, what's wrong with you? Question mark. Is kind of what this becomes. Like, why? Why are you gonna die before your classmates? Well, I mean, this becomes pretty personal. There must be something that other dolphins have that you don't have, like that your dolphin classmates who live in normal dolphin neighborhoods in the wild. They must have something that you don't. So that's what you need, right? There must be something. Like your friends who are normal wild dolphins must have something, some sort of adaptation that contributes to life, longevity, that you don't have. And that's got to be it, right? So that's what we're looking for. What are you lacking that your buddies in the wild are not lacking? So sharks that prey on dolphins are less common than in many areas of the open seas. Well, this would mean, if you simplify this for your theoretical 10-year-old, I mean, this means that the sharks are actually less likely to be near the beach. So what would that mean for you? You're the beach dolphin. This would mean that you would live for longer. Remember, you're the dolphin at the beach. So AA is the opposite. AA would be a reason why you would live. You would be less likely to be killed. Because the sharks are not there. Many of the adult dolphins are females. Well, that's nice. That doesn't tell you why you're gonna die. The fish given to them are the same type. This is not a difference. I mean, we need something different, not something that is the same. So, and then D, many dolphins only come there a few times a month. Sure, but they still come. Also, this is not a difference. This actually diminishes the difference rather than explaining it. Yeah, this means that we don't come as often, and still yet there's still this difference. I mean, this actually makes it seem like less of a difference, not explaining it. But okay, if it's E, then, you know, I don't know how to get food. I mean, I don't know how to hunt properly. So I'm more likely to starve to death. I mean, the only thing that's plausibly an explanation for why I might die before the wild dolphins is going to be that one. So there it is. I mean, it's from both, but I mean, if you're the kid dolphin, this is certainly from your perspective too. This means mommy and daddy didn't teach me how to hunt. Oh, well, that's too bad. Too bad for me. It's not too bad for them. I mean, they're fine, man. Callous, perhaps, but fine. But this means that they did not impart these skills to me that I need as a dolphin in order to hang out like a dolphin and eat. So absolutely it is from both perspectives, but from mine more directly, because I'm the affected one. I mean, their not imparting skills to me doesn't really affect them. It affects me. Yeah, cute question. Dolphins. All right, let's take a look at something else. How about that? Alrighty, give it a shot. All right, let's pick something that is a thing. A lot of you guys, you have not picked something that is a thing. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and pick something in the next short bit, please. Okay, there is still a larger than normal number of people who have not answered this yet, but let's move on. We can't really wait forever. So, I mean, we're talking about selling things to people again. I think we made this. It's difficult to make general observations most of the time, but when you talk about sales, there's going to be one point of view that is ultimately paramount. Pretty much all the time, which is going to be who's. In this case, it is the commuters, but more generally when you are trying to sell things to someone, who's making the call on that? Yeah, it's the customer, because ultimately it depends on can you sell. I mean, even if you were going to be on a steering committee to determine like a new sales strategy, you know how that would go, right? You would be like, okay, I'm the customer, what am I going to look at? It's all the priorities of the customer. So not the vendor. The vendor is pretty much the slave of the customer. At least if you want to do good business. I mean, it's not your priorities. It's what people want to buy. You know. I mean, just think about any example of commercial markets. For example, like if you want to sell diet books, I mean, a good diet book would be very complicated because human nutrition is not simple. But you know how people are when they buy diet books. I mean, the vast majority of people want it to be really simple. You know, and unfortunately, if you want to make profits, you have to make it simple. I mean, you might really want it to be the full picture, but you're not going to sell that. It's what people want to buy. It's not what people want to sell. That's not ultimately what matters. So the customer is always king when it comes to whether sales will be high or low. That's the customer's decision, ultimately speaking, always. So you are the potential buyer, as in any other situation involving sales of things. So yeah, what does this mean? And again, if you browse it quickly enough, you will notice this. It's a sales incentive question, which means that I need to think about it from a potential buyer's point of view. So let's go back and read this from a potential buyer's point of view. So I'm thinking about buying an electric car. What's putting me off of buying an electric car? I'm thinking about buying an EV, electric vehicle. But what? Yeah, I really want to go on road trips, which are, more than trivial length. So their plan is to give me 3 free days of rental for my road trip, right? 3 days rental credit for every 1,000 miles I drive my EV. So what they're trying to do, I mean, I'm going to like this for sure. I mean, like, I will obviously like the rental credit. I mean, that's clearly a positive. So from my point of view, this is clearly a good incentive. So therefore, what does there have to be to threaten the plan? I mean, I like this for sure. So for me to not like this plan, there has to be, from my point of view, there has to be something that is a what? I mean, you don't have to be super specific yet, but like it has to be a con. I mean, this is a pro. So if this is all pros all day, then clearly the plan will not be threatened. threaten the plan for success means that we want a reason why this plan might actually make me less likely to buy the EV, or at least not any more likely. So we need something that we need a con that will offset that pro. And I mean, it doesn't have to be a reason why I'm not going to be able to take road trips. I mean, it's because this is a purchasing decision, and I remember that this is a commuting vehicle. I mean, it's not, road trips are not the only thing in the world. I mean, I'm also going to buy this car and just drive it to work and back all the time too. So, but I'm the buyer. I mean, anything that works against my purchase decision is a thing. That's why. I mean, if you personalize this passage, you're not restricted to thinking about road trips. You are a commuter who is thinking about buying this car, and anything weighing against buying the car is going to be a bad thing. So let's take a look at that. So remember that you're not just any potential customer. You are specifically a potential customer for whom commuting is a priority and for whom road trips are also a priority. So there's a very specific role that you play. You are a potential buyer who wants the EV for a daily commute, and who values the ability to take road trips. So meaning A is irrelevant because A is about people who are not you. I mean, A just says that there are other customers who don't care about trips, or that there are cars that you can't use for trips. Either way, this is irrelevant. I mean, it could be if it's for people who don't want to take road trips, then we don't care. And if it's about EVs that can't go on road trips, that doesn't matter either, because that's the whole point of the plan. The whole point of the plan is that you don't have to take your EV on a road trip because you can take the rental car instead. So basically, this is okay. That's fine because I can take the rental car. So sure. B says that they would have to buy so many rental cars. They would have to pay for so many rental cars that it would make the EV super expensive. Well, I'm thinking about buying an EV. The EV is already really expensive, and this plan will make it way more expensive. If anything was ever a con, that would sure be a con. Absolutely. Because I mean, and you can see what they're trying to do with the words here. The already high price, the way they phrase that is definitely trying to suggest that this is already pricey, that the price is already the main negative, and then add considerably to it. So it's pricing me out of the market here. It's making it a bad buy. So no, I shouldn't have crossed that out. I don't know why I crossed that out. No, price of the vehicle is the price of the consumer. I mean, because first of all, that's what that means by default. But also, it's not the cost of the producer. I mean, if you think about how this works, the producer wholesales these things at a certain rate. But they are the ones who have to pay for the rentals, and so they're going to roll that into the consumer price, meaning that you're ultimately paying for it anyway, is the consumer. Yeah, they'll pass it on. John, that's a good way of saying it. It's yeah. What is C? I mean, how do you explain C to a 10-year-old? Anybody? Yeah, that's exactly what C says. C says recharging the car is a non-issue. So let's put that down there in the bottom of the screen. I mean, C actually takes a potential negative and defuses it. This is C explained to a 10-year-old. In other words, this is a pro. Or at least it knocks out a con. it kills a potential objection. Because, I mean, you might, if it takes a really long time to charge the battery, that would be a potential problem with this car. And C says that it's not a problem at all. So, yeah. And then for the irregular use, you've got your rental car anyway. So C is actually a good reason for me to buy the EV, because I know that if I was afraid of having to pull over halfway through my drive to work and sit there for an hour while it charges, now I know I don't have to be afraid of that anymore. So, yeah, I mean, right, and it doesn't deal directly with the plan. That's another good point that Angelica makes. I mean, it's not, C is kind of an inherent reason to not worry about a certain aspect of EVs, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with this particular plan, which is another reason to. That's actually a good observation, because if I gave you a different negative of EVs that had nothing to do with the plan, then it would be the wrong answer. Like if you had a choice that said EVs become much more expensive to maintain after a moderate number of miles driven than normal cars, that would be a really bad thing. That would be a very strong strike against purchasing an EV, but it would not be something wrong with the plan. It would just be something wrong with EVs across the board. And so that's an excellent observation. You have to stick with things that are aspects of the plan, or at least consequences of the plan. So very nicely done. D says generating the electricity can burden the environment. So that's kind of like what we were saying, right? You might consider this a negative if you are a green type of buyer, but this is not an aspect of the plan. This is a potential drawback of EVs across the board, which is not what we're asking. And then E is about people who are not you. This is irrelevant to you because you are somebody who does want to use the vehicle for commutes. So this just says there are people who don't want to use it for commute. But that's fine. That's not you. That's them. That's the other guy. How about that? All right, let's see what's in the cost from the producer passed on to the consumer is. The explain to a 10-year-old thing is, where I'm going with that is that even if these things seem like they are abstractions, the point is that you can reduce them to things that are concrete. And 10 years old is kind of that magical age where a kid can understand really just about anything that is concrete, but still has issues with abstractions. And so that's a good age to think about explaining these things to. For example, in that last one about flu shots, there was this very abstract statistical prediction of the spread of flu across the country will be, mitigated or something like that. It was very abstract and very generalized. But, that would be nothing to a 10-year-old. But you could say that means, you as a parent will be more willing to give a flu shot, and that does mean something to a 10-year-old. So that's just my way of saying make things more concrete. Because, realistically speaking, if I just say make things concrete, ironically, that's too abstract. That's not directions that people can really follow. But when you put a child in front of someone, the vast majority of people just become weirdly good at explaining things. If you have any nieces, nephews, sons, daughters, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's weird how good people get at explaining stuff when kids are in the picture. They're very good at it. It might be just hardwired into our brains, like baby talk is. They just get good at explaining stuff. So, what may be the caveats? That question is a bit abstract for me. I don't really know what that question means. You might, if you take the wrong perspective, I guess it might be hard to see what the issue is, but that seems no worse than not personalizing at all. Let's see, what else? What else is written in there? I mean, again, Bruno, if you're a car producer, think about, like, let's say that you are a car producer. Whose perspective are you still going to have to try to empathize with if you want to sell cars? I mean, ultimately, it's still the buyer. Like, if you make yourself the car producer, go ahead and make yourself the car producer in your mind, and then think about how you're going to market the car. The very first thing you're going to do is think from the buyer's perspective, because you want to sell that car to that buyer. So you're still going to wind up coming back to the consumer through that channel. And the irony of NL's comment is one of the reasons that I am good at these problems is because I actually have lots of trouble with abstractions. I don't really understand abstractions all that well. I've been that way my whole life. I mean, you know, like when other kids, like if someone said a food was good for you, you know, and other kids would nod their heads, I'd be like, oh, what does that mean? Like, good for you how? What does it do? What does it affect? You know, it's like that. I mean, everything has to be concrete. It's actually, I'm kind of like a giant fourth grader in that sense, and that definitely helps here. Because these questions what's interesting about these questions is they don't really ever treat things that are too abstract for a fourth grader. You know, like they don't treat things like, oh, exchange rate futures, which that's way too abstract. I mean, you could not explain to a 10-year-old, like, betting on future fluctuations in currency exchange. This is too much. And you don't see stuff like that in these passages. You see stuff that can be very efficiently reduced to concrete things, and that's not a coincidence. You know, because if you're trying to measure, you know, the productivity of the business, you have to do the same sort of thing. You have to, like, take abstractions and find concrete metrics by which to measure them, and that's the kind of thinking that is that even I don't know what that says. But I am not in my mid-80s. Okay. I do have a weird voice. That is very true. And I actually congratulate those of you who can make it through 90 minutes of listening to me. All right. Here's another one. I gotta say this is the first edition of Thursdays with Ron that has ever had hecklers. That's a new level that we're at here, guys. All right. Haters at Thursdays with Ron. Okay, let's talk about this problem here. Here's the timer. All right. Let's pick a thing as a thing. And let's discuss. Who are you when you read this passage? I mean, the question in the box, I mean, there are passages that are not really personal. I mean, notice the qualifier that we wrote on I don't know if you were here for the opening screen, but you do have to have some reason why personal perspectives would be insightful. I mean, if the passage is about why certain proteins are not found on the surface of an antibody, then personal perspectives are probably not that important. But if there's anything involving the actions of people or of, you know, things composed of people like businesses, then absolutely, you know, it's people. People's actions they involve personal stake. So that's what economics ultimately is. You know, it's just people acting on personal incentives on a large scale. So let's talk about this. Yeah, you want to be someone who works for the pharma industry and who's advocating this. I mean, you want to be the person who makes this argument. you are the person you're the pharma person who wants longer patent periods. So you develop drugs, and let's say that you have a stake in the company, like you have a financial stake in the company. So why do you, like, explain this to a 10-year-old here. Like, why do you feel like, and I mean, you can explain patents by just saying that it's no one else is allowed to do it. That's how you can explain what a patent is to a 10-year-old. So that I have more time to sell it, but that's what, let's make sure we can capture the essence of this argument. Why are you being so selfish? I mean, that's really the question you might be answering here. Like, that's awfully selfish of you. You already have 20 years. But yeah, the argument is that, as the funder of, as the investor, as the person invested in this personally, my money goes towards development. And, we need to make back my money, our money. So we need more than 20 years. That's the perspective here in a nutshell. And then the counter argument, like the hater says, in other industries, so someone is like, actually, we get that done, and we don't need that time. So what do you need? If you're going to defend this position, I mean, the first thing that should be clear is that you need something that is different again. I mean, again, the only patterns you're really going to see are going to be very, very general patterns. Like, for example, if you were talking about the wild dolphins versus the beach-fed dolphins, ultimately you'd have to find a difference. Like, anything that it was the same would not be a thing. You're looking for a distinction. You're looking to justify the fact that you need more than 20 years, even though the haters don't. So that's exactly what we need, is what Angelica says, pretty much verbatim, what I had in mind. Why are we different? What is so special about us that we are different? It's got to be both of these things, not just one of them. It's got to, because it can't just be any old reason. It has to be particular to the pharma industry, because otherwise it would theoretically, otherwise these guys would still have an argument against us. So A is just saying that everybody's a hater except us, but that certainly doesn't support us. That makes us look even more selfish and crazy. If it's everyone else's problem, it's probably your problem, kind of thing. No, B, C, we cannot even start selling drugs until 10 years in. So this means that our 20-year period is really a 10-year period, and while everybody else has 20 years. So this is what we want. This means that our patent period is really not nearly as long as it looks like it is, and so there's an argument for extending it by at least that 10 years. This is saying that there are other industries where they sink even more money into development, and yet they still do it in less than 20 years. So, wrong way. And then this one, an existing patent doesn't prevent blah, 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 blah. This just means that patents have a certain loophole that other companies can exploit. And so basically this means the effectiveness of patents would be less than I would expect. this doesn't help my argument. I mean, I'm trying to say that patents are a good thing that I need. This is kind of like they won't do much in the first place. You know, if they can just stick a methyl group onto that drug and then they can sell the same thing. That doesn't help me. And then also, E says there's been a lot of good stuff going on, even when patents have been terrible at protecting intellectual property. Well, this would pretty much go right against me again. I mean, I'm the one who wants to argue that I need a patent period to be effective. So this is the wrong way. Again, notice if you take this point of view, you'd be surprised by how many answer choices you'll see that are exactly the opposite of what you want. It'll happen. I mean, the differences are not small differences. They appear to be small differences until you have a personal stake, and then you realize that they're huge differences. Let's try to hit up another one of these things. Just one more. How about that one? So we're talking about prescription drugs again. The timer. All right, looks like this one is more troublesome than some of the others. There's less consistency to what you guys are picking. But if you have to guess, the stats are kind of all over the place on this one. There's some signal, but a lot of noise. But I'll just make it interesting. While you guys are, there's still about 10 or 12 of you without answers right now, but while we are finishing that, let's talk about point of view. Whose point of view, whose action ultimately is the center of the discussion? So the lawmaker is not so much, because they are not in the interaction that is being scrutinized. I mean, the lawmakers are responding to other people's behavior in the same way that like you could think first of all if you want to think from the lawmaker's perspective first, you can. But when you do that, you're going to find yourself analyzing the behavior of others anyway. Like, it's kind of like if you are in the sales problems, if you make yourself the vendor, then all that's going to mean is you're going to just think about the customer's behavior anyway, except you're going to think about it as the vendor, but you're still ultimately thinking about the same person. Like, the decision is, I mean, the argument is about whether inappropriate prescriptions will be made. I mean, who makes those? Well, the doctors do. So let's read this from the standpoint of the doctor, because the doctor does this. So you be the doctor. So right now you can't advertise prescription drugs except to you, like RX advertisements or drug advertisements are exclusively aimed at you, not at your patients. That's what's going on right now. And, but they want the lawmakers are thinking about allowing drug advertisements to the general population, which would mean, in your case, to your patients. You know, like the Viagra commercials that you see that just make everything super awkward when you see them. Like that kind of thing. So, and then, right, like how often is that when you're like watching TV with your grandparents and, oh, Viagra commercial. Okay, Opponents object that the general population lacks the specialized knowledge to advertise, blah, 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 blah. I mean, again, if you're the doctor, you just read this as this last part of it. Oh, yeah, that's pretty bad, too. They might come in and ask for drugs that they really shouldn't ask for. So the consideration is this might make them come in and ask for drugs they don't need or shouldn't have. But you know better, you're not going to give in. That's what this means. You're not going to give in. And that is like, right? Right? That's the issue. You're not going to give in, right? Tap you on the shoulder. So the issue is, are you going to capitulate to this influence? Because ultimately it has to be you who, lets the water through the dam, so to speak. Because the customer can't write him or herself a prescription. So you want something that affects this issue. You want a reason why you might actually give in. So you want some sort of consideration that would mean that you might actually write these prescriptions. So this says effective treatments, which means that we're not talking about ineffective or inappropriate. I mean, these would be quite appropriate. So that's wrong. I mean, that would be completely appropriate prescriptions. This one, whether some people might go, I mean, in fact, we know they will. In fact, that's anticipated, right? Like they might come in and ask for that. So this is something that we are prepared for, but this has nothing to do with whether we will give in. This just says they'll ask, but not that we'll say yes. So this is just they'll ask. It's not we'll say yes. This one, does it have to be the same information? Well, I mean, that's as long as there is an advertisement. In fact, if it doesn't prescribe the same information, that might even make them more likely to come in with inquiries. Like if we get the detailed pamphlet, about how Viagra might make you go blind if you take it with sulfites, but all they get is the cute thing showing the happy older couple in renewed love. I mean, they might be more likely to come in and ask about it. So, doesn't matter, right? The point is that the advertisements go out to the customers. They probably don't have all the same information because they're meant for lay people. So, but as long as there are advertisements, and that's what matters. D, whether they are currently an important source of information. We're not thinking about current. We're thinking about what happens if this law lets out a bunch of advertisements into the public. I mean, these are not things that exist right now. But then E is about us giving in, right? E is specifically about us. In fact, they even use the phrase "give in." That's going to be the answer we want. If you have never been a physician, how do you become #confident in #confident? Oh, okay, that's supposed to be like italics or something. Okay, I got you. This is something that you can do even if you've never been a doctor. You can still think about it from that perspective. I mean, in the same sense that if you're going to go into business, you absolutely have to think from the perspective of whomever you happen to do business with. even if you are not those people. I mean, you know, I don't know how to give you any better answer than just saying the same way that you could empathize with any other individual. I mean, you don't need specific medical knowledge to answer this question. I mean, if this question started dishing about, you know, advanced surgical techniques, then you would be in trouble. But as long as you understand that doctors are the people who write the prescriptions and patients are not, that's pretty much all you need here. In general, they're not going to write questions that would require you to understand specialized perspectives, because then nobody would be able to solve them. Do you? It would be interesting if you, I'm definitely open to looking at if you think there are questions that do require such knowledge. It would be interesting to see what those are. So let's see. Doesn't D oscillate the physician's ultimate decision? Sarah, that could be a thing, but remember what the boundaries on the argument are. Like, we're talking about whether this would become more common as the result of this new law. I mean, so if D were a thing, then D would already be a thing. And so it would not produce a delta. It would not produce any sort of increase in bad prescriptions. Like, if you're right that this could be causing bad prescriptions to be written, but then they would already be being written. And this new law would not cause that to happen more often. Let's see. Wouldn't a false advertisement be a... But it doesn't say a false advertisement. I mean, that would be a totally different animal. And even if it was a completely false advertisement, which it doesn't say that it is, even if it were, that would still not impact the ultimate decision, which is the doctor's behavior. Again, you're the doctor. I mean, if you're a patient, in fact, if it were completely false advertising, you would most likely be much less likely to give in. You'd be like, you know what, that advertisement you saw is complete bunk, so just throw it in the garbage and don't listen to it. So if that were an issue, it would be probably even less likely to be important. So... Sure, let's see other things in the box. We are assuming... I mean, you don't really need to assume anything about interpretations or about what information is there. Because again, think about what the issue is. The issue is ultimately this. And don't let that get out of your sight. The issue is whether you will give in to your patient's pleading. And I mean, regardless of what information is present in their ads versus your ads, ultimately there's no reason to think that that would affect your decision, because it's not you, it's what is shown to them. But ultimately, you're still making the same judgment call. The physician's failure to give. Let's see. It has something to do with the physician's failure to give a good prescription in the first place. Let me think if I can understand what you're asking here. I mean, the question is about whether there would be an increase in bad prescriptions as a result of people asking. So that doesn't seem to be affected by, I mean, obviously not 100% of prescriptions will work. I mean, medicine is not a perfect science. But we're not concerned with the performance of the original prescription. We're concerned with whether doctors will, again, you're the doctor. We're concerned with whether you will be swayed into doing something you would not otherwise have done because of ads shown to other people. And at the end of the day, that the performance of the original RX is not an issue there. Okay, got to run here pretty soon, so we're going to have to make this Luis, you absolutely should read the question before the passage because the question gives you goals. Like if you don't read this first, you kind of don't really know what you're trying to do with the passage. But sure, okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here. Thank you, guys. That was certainly an entertaining session for many reasons. That was interesting. As far as the most interesting part of that may have just been someone's. Maybe it was just a really awkward attempt at humor or something. I don't know. It was. I've never had it happen before. That was interesting. All right, let's kill the recording. Good night and good luck. Thank you. The next session is, I do believe the next session is in 2 weeks. So thanks. I appreciate the kind words. That's very nice of you. Thanks. All right, good night. Good luck.